Welcome back, Social 20-1. We are about to finish the French Revolution. We're going to continue now with Outcome 3 and explore to what extent did the revolutionaries accomplish their goal of liberty, equality, and fraternity. Also, and I apologize in advance for the potential length of this video, there's going to be a lot of other tying up of loose ends. So to begin with, there's an essay from a former student that you can read through to determine to what extent did the French Revolution achieve liberty, equality, and fraternity. So in the old regime, the caste system greatly favored a few individuals and forced great oppression onto the majority of the nation. The feudalistic waves of government didn't allow for any participation in decision-making for the commoners. During the time period, the country of France had just come out of the 100 Years' War and therefore struggling financially, emotionally, and physically. The bubonic plague had swept through the nation, causing more suffering. A huge population boom was occurring, but the agricultural revolution had not yet reached France, so food sources dwindled. Low wages made it hard for the average person to afford the scarce and therefore highly priced food. The inequality of the majority of the population had to struggle to survive, and the absolute monarchs ruled in comfort, caused a huge rift in the relationship between the king and his people. The huge gaps between the people through status systems did nothing to help the situation because the rich didn't want to give up their way of life and couldn't see the dilemma from the class views. Obviously some typos there. No one was able to work together. The sum of situations causes a need for revolution. The slogan for the revolution to come was liberty, equality, and fraternity. Many critics have opposed the opinion that the French were able to achieve the goal because of the reign of Napoleon as an authoritative ruler. The truth is that through the revolution, the objectives were achieved. Wow, look at that. We're about to see how they're achieved. Fraternity is a strong bond or a sense of connection between individuals. This bond between the people of France was brought about several times throughout the course of the revolution. One of the first strong examples of fraternity was in the case of the creation of the National Assembly. This group was made up of delegates of all three estates. They felt that the king was failing as a leader in the current situations of France, and that the Third Estate wanted to attain some power. Through the making of this assembly, they were making a connection between all class systems. This strong, influential group wanted to bring about a constitution. In a meeting, they swore an oath in the tennis courts not to leave until the document was made. This example shows the gathering together of many people for a common goal, thus achieving fraternity. A second example of fraternity is in the fall of the Bastille. The Bastille was widely seen as a symbol of the king's power and authority over the French people. On July 14, 1789, a mob stormed the Bastille and won control over the powerful location. Even though the king was not anywhere near the event, the loss of control of the Bastille represented the exchange of power from the king into the hands of the masses. This event created a bond to all those suffering and in need of a change, because the switch of power brought hope and promise of a better life as long as they worked together as united brothers. Levée en masse was the beginning of the idea of total war. This is where the entire country fights as one unit. This event was the conscription of all the men between ages 18 to 25 to go off to war, as well as anyone left behind must help out in the war efforts at home. The idea binded the entire nation into one common action, fraternity. On August the 10th, 1792, an angry mob went with a common goal of capturing and getting rid of the king and queen, the remaining symbol of status, defining French society. They worked together, killing 600 Swiss guards, and in unison sang the song Les Marseillaise, symbolized the unity and the growth of the group during the attack. Equality, being the absence of differences or separation, was a definite outcome of the French Revolution. The people of the Nationalist Assembly wanted a constitution with the idea of sharing in the decision-making. The fall of the Bastille ensured that the power was transferred into the hands of the masses. Thus, the power was more evenly distributed. Revolutionaries abolished the feudalistic government. Therefore, power was no longer a right, but something to be attained or achieved. Whoever ruled had to have the support, the will of the people. The republic-style government took over the old monarchy. The Declaration, this student really didn't like capital letters. The Declaration of the Rights of Man and Citizen was issued during the Revolution. The document stated that all men are born equally. Therefore, nobility no longer existed, and everybody was considered a single class. The execution of the king and the queen was one of the other actions taken to achieve equality. The king and queen were symbols of status and division in France. By executing them, it represented that France had departed from its former times of divisions and inequality. Liberty can be defined as freedom. Freedom was attained during the French Revolution through many examples. Many documents brought about liberty to the people of France. The Declaration of the Rights of Man states that all men have the right to liberty, prosperity, security, and resistance to oppression. Servants were no longer owned, but were considered free, and like any other individual, the civil constitution of the clergy granted freedom to all religious groups. The abolishment of feudalism granted liberty from the harsh reign of the divine ruler. They were free through, though equally, to not be limited by status or wealth. These three aspects of the French Revolution were very closely related. One is not achieved without the other. The revolution would have ceased to exist without all three, as they shaped every event that occurred. Fraternity brought the nation together to make a difference and bring about liberty. Through liberty, they could achieve equality, and by being equal, they have again strengthened that fraternal bond, made even stronger through the events faced by them commonly to achieve the revolution. To say that liberty, fraternity, and equality were not achieved would be like to say that the revolution did not occur. Okay, there's that student's rant. Now we have some further notes about the coming of liberty, equality, and fraternity to the French. I'm going to get you to read through those ones on your own. I'm not going to read those ones to you. Obviously, I'm a horrible reader. So definitely read through those and see if you can add to the notes that you just had. After you read through those, another way to look at the French Revolution, did we achieve liberty, equality, fraternity, is to look at the revolution from the lens of symbols. What symbols did they have during the revolution? And perhaps through an analysis of the symbols, we can see fraternity. So we have the tricolore, we have the bonnet, we have the sans culotte, the short pants. And all of these are meant to be different symbols of a coming together, a fraternal bond of people with a common ideology, common vision. Here's a good summary of what the terms liberty, equality, and fraternity mean. So go to that summary if you have any doubt. And when you look at your timeline, you can go back to that timeline that we did in a few steps ago, and you can look at the events and say, okay, which of these, with regards to this event, which of liberty, equality, and fraternity may have been achieved, or maybe it wasn't achieved during that time period. So another way to look at this is, did we achieve liberty, equality, and fraternity through the French Revolution? Another way to look at it is, what is the legacy of the revolution? Like, why are we still studying this thing? It's hundreds of years old. Well, here's an observation. The French Revolution is this extraordinary moment when people began to believe that you could actually recreate everything in society. Not only could you change the politics, the institutions, but you could change human nature itself through political action. It was the crossroads of the modern world. Deliberate on that. Pause on that. Try to see if you can mirror that with the message of achieving liberty, equality, and fraternities. Try to see if you can look at your timeline and see what events are they talking about that changed the nature of the modern world. Another way to look at the legacy of the French Revolution is to look at the origin of the political system. I've already created a supplemental video on that, but this is where you can get some additional notes on terms like radical, reactionary, conservative, and liberal. And here's an excellent visual that looks at, what did they want with regards to the French Revolution. So during the Revolution, the radicals, or the Jacobins, and they wanted an end to the monarchy and to kill the monarch, kill the king. Whereas the reactionaries, they wanted to return to the old regime. And there's a more contemporary description of what those terms refer to. Here's just a cartoon that is looking at the idea of being a reactionary in Russia in 1995 would mean to go back to the Soviet Union, which is an interesting thing because communism is usually seen as a progressive thing. So the idea of radical reactionary, it's dependent upon what kind of change. What would change look like in that scenario? Is it regressive or is it progressive? Is it going back or is it moving forward? Are we doing something new or something old? Here's an optional assignment that you definitely don't need to do, but you can talk to me about it if you're looking forward to doing optional assignments. I would think that it would be to your benefit to skim through some of these legacies of the French Revolution. And the keyword there is skim. What the revolution showed is that it would in the future be impossible to ignore the vast mass of the people. Anything in green should be getting your attention, saying this could be on a multiple choice test. You can't ignore the vast mass of the people. We definitely saw that at the storming of the Bastille. Some people might say, though, you know what? We haven't achieved a final solution to problems of inequality. We still have inequality today. We have the 1% and the 99%. That's why we have the Occupy movement, is that we haven't achieved equality. And maybe to some extent, economic liberty is the reason we haven't achieved equality. That the economic liberty of some have allowed them to accumulate more wealth, not mass, but sometimes mass, more wealth than others. So this is the idea that maybe we don't have the benefits of the French Revolution yet because we have extreme wealth held in the hands of a few where the majority have very little wealth. So do we have a hierarchy today in America? Yes, we do. Economically, we do. And because we have an economic hierarchy, we also have a social hierarchy. And because we have a socio-economic hierarchy, we have a political hierarchy, meaning that some people have more economic power, so therefore they have more social status, so therefore we have more political influence. So whereas at one point we might talk about monarchs and landed gentries and nobles having more power than others, today we might talk about central bankers and corporate elite having more power and status and opportunity to influence government than others. But we, much like we did in 1789, we have seen some populist protests like the Yellow Vests and the Occupy movement I mentioned before. The Occupy movement, the Yellow Vests, the Convoy of Freedom, these are all the masses, the 99% saying, hey, listen to us. We are unhappy with the current government and its corrupted nature by its connections to the elite. So here the government is corrupted, the U.S. government, George W. Bush is in the middle there, is corrupted by its connections to Enron and Halliburton and ExxonMobil and other corporations have created a government that is actually a corptocracy because they rule on behalf of corporations. And that's what's being expressed here too, is that we have three branches of government, but who do they serve? Do they serve the people? No, they serve the corporations. So maybe the biggest threat to democracy today, if that was the goal of the revolution, is the corporate power. So skim through this section on social inequality and corporate inequality. So if equality was the goal, then why does this white guy have such an easy race ahead of him towards success? And this visible minority woman has obstacles that she faces that he does not. Now, these metaphorical obstacles, we're not actually putting alligators and crocodiles in the path of people on the way to success and landmines either, but they are metaphors for the inequality that exists in the world today. Whereas even though the second wave of feminism was meant to address economic inequality, women still make a fraction of what men make for working the same job. So lottery of birth. This guy, he's born rich. He takes an elevator to success. Middle class have a rope to get up there. The rope is frayed at times. This poor guy, he has a little ladder, and you know what? He can get creative as he wants, but that ladder is only going to be able to raise him to a certain height. This is a very insightful cartoon here. It's looking at, if France was the home of liberté, equality, and fraternité, then why do we have marginalization of women in France today? Why do we have marginalization of minorities in France today? Why is France known for its Islamophobia today? Why is it known for its xenophobia today, fear of outsiders as well? So that's what the cartoonist is meant to be shaming France, and this idea that you are the birthplace of modern liberalism, right? Of this idea of human rights, and yet there's a disconnect between what you've said in the past and what you do today. That the France today is shaking on the pillars of a once great nation built on individual liberty and human rights, because you're not treating everyone the same. There's prejudice and racism and sexism and bias, and that's what's being outlined there. And then we just continue to see other things here. Kind of as a wrap up, there's a comparison between the American and French revolutions. Feel free to skim through that. It's an interesting read. You're probably not going to get tested on it. And I always throw additional stuff at the end, keep adding to it. Here's more stuff about inequality of taxation today, one of the issues we had at the beginning of the French Revolution. Goes back and says this is what the old regime looked like, the first, second estates then, just so that you can compare it to things now as well. So that's our wrap up of the French Revolution. Last concept that's in here, I guess, is to what extent is violence ever necessary or justifiable? There's a cartoon that glorifies violence as a means to an end in the French Revolution. And we're talking about the nature of mankind here, right, as a wrap-up thing. To what extent are violent revolutions justifiable? Something for you to think about, and we'll end it there.